to talk a little bit with Pamela. Pamela, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You've got a great book here called A Dimly Burning Wick, and then we'll talk a little bit about the book, and then you've got a little video clip to play. And then after that, we can run through some pictures, which are also part of the book, right, as I recall. Sure. And I think you mentioned this book's been, what, 20, 25 years into writing, something like that?
Pretty much, at least the English edition. What happened was I met a woman named Sadako Teiko Okuda who had been in Hiroshima shortly after the bombing. We met because I went for a year to teach through a program like the Peace Corps, Volunteers in Asia, at the school where she worked. In a way, she's a typical person. You know, she was a teacher of knitting and sewing to children when the bombing happened. She happened to be living about 35 miles outside of Hiroshima, so quite a distance from where, yes. But even from that distance, it became clear to the villagers in the island that she was on that something terrible had happened. And so she and her mother made the decision to send her into the city looking for her niece and nephew and sister-in-law. And she arrived in Hiroshima on August 7th, the morning after the bombing. And every night, as she searched for her niece and nephew, she took notes. She basically kept a diary. And then when she was able in the late 70s, she made it into a book in Japan. It was also translated into Korean within a couple of years. And then the period that you mentioned took almost a good solid 2 decades to get it into English for a variety of reasons.
So you were the translator for this?
I translated it and edited it and essentially acted as her helper in trying to get it published in English. And one of my goals was to not just get a very strong translation of it, but was to come out with a book which would allow people who don't know any of the history to understand how this decision was made, some of the reasons why it was made, and not just from the standpoint of leaders like Truman, FDR, and
the ones that made the decisions back then.
Exactly. But also to look at it from the sense of ordinary Americans as well. You know, when you talk about other events, you often talk about the complicity or the involvement of the ordinary citizen as part of how that comes about. And of course, this was at a time when people were very interested in ending the war in the U.S. But there are a lot of lessons from that period of history for what's going on currently. I was thinking as you were talking, Paige, about Hanford, you know, thinking, have I heard correctly that and seen on your web, that the nuclear waste from Hanford, it's not going to stay at Hanford. It's gradually coming through water systems and...
Yeah, actually the Columbia River has been contaminated, you know, and that doesn't mean that it was contaminated and now it's all over. There is continual seeping into the river because from the 177 tanks of high-level radioactive waste that the tanks are aging. Every tank will eventually leak.
And you know, when you look at nuclear weapons, let alone nuclear waste, when you look at nuclear weapons, it's a very, very hard thing for people to think about. If you're American, it's very hard. If you have some concerns about whether the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was, quote unquote, the right thing to do at that time, it's very hard to look back at that. And yet, that's what the point that the book tries to make is that both in her words and in the words of the chapters that I contributed to, Ronald Takaki, winner of the American Book Award, contributed a chapter, Paul Joseph, Catherine Thomason, the president, past president,
here.
right, but she's also the past president of Physicians for Social Responsibility. When you look at the book as a whole, it really is trying to offer that sense of hope. But key to getting to hope that will really affect change is understanding that none of us really wants to think about this issue. And yet we need to look at the history, and in a way it doesn't matter so much whether it's, you know, who was to blame or how to assign blame or how to apportion it, but to realize that this has happened, these weapons are out there. They are, many countries have them, which many people are not that comfortable with. There is increasing nuclear proliferation and the chance that those will get into just anyone's hands who would like to use one. But when you even look at the way the U.S. cares for the weapons, it's really not all that reassuring.
In what way?
There was an excellent New York Times article just about a month ago, June 6, June 8, something like that, where it turns out that they found out that some components to nuclear weapons were misplaced on a shipment. Probably should have brought the notes with me on that, but basically it was
Taiwan, I think.
Taiwan. Yeah, I was going to say.
I just saw it on TV today.
Exactly, and you know, major officials in the U.S. government were let go because even though those were not perhaps the most dangerous parts, you don't want pieces of something like a Minuteman missile just floating around. But anyone who's ever traveled in airplanes knows luggage gets lost.
And piles up.
And no one wants to think about this. And so what I really tried to do with the book is to give people a way to understand the history, understand what happened, but also understand their feelings about it and how they can, without that much trouble now, thanks to the internet, fairly easily educate themselves. There are wonderful organizations like Physicians for Social Responsibility. There's the Nuclear Threat Institute, Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. And I put on the book's website, the book is called A Dimly Burning Wick. I think you mentioned that, but A Dimly Burning Wick, Memoir from the Ruins of Hiroshima. The book's website is www.a-dimly-burning-wick.com. Some links to these kinds of organizations that just, you know, ordinary school children, very busy adults, moms and dads with families, grandparents can go to and really try to make a small impact on this. Instead of taking the way that most of us, including myself many, many times, would rather just go on and have fun and, you know, do our normal job and not really deal with it.
Things, you know, look at the situation with global warming, climate change. People have been going on doing their thing, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Well, the name of the book is A Dimly Burning Wick. You can look that up. If you don't have to put the hyphens in there. If you go to your Google and A Dimly Burning Wick, it'll come up. And we have a little clip. It's about a minute long. It's on a DVD. Is this the woman that wrote the book? Because you have a quick little interview. It's about a minute long.
This clip is from a documentary that was made about her book in about 1982 by Nihon Terebi, a big Japanese broadcasting station. The director was Yukio Sasaki. And this talks about her experience and her feelings about this event. So this took place many years after the event, but also a bit removed from our time. One thing I hadn't mentioned but might be good, because she talks in the clip about how she teaches at this high school. One thing that also might not occur to people, especially I think Americans, is that this book is there is a chapter I would not suggest with younger readers, but much of it is very accessible to high school students, middle school students. 2 of the chapters were actually made into children's picture books in Japan. And so that's a little bit of what we've tried to do with the illustrations too, is to make it
more universal and broad
exactly.
an appeal. All right, so I think we'll get that DVD going here. We'll be back in a little over a minute.
あのことを通して私は自分が強くなったと思います。
I think I grew stronger from
責
the
任があるっていう
experience.
ふうに考えるようにな
I
りました
also
ね。
feel very responsible. I
あの
couldn't
時は何
do
もできなかっ
anything
たけれども
when the
ね、
bomb was
これ
dropped.
から私にやらなきゃいけない仕事があるような気がして、それはつまり
I must
私
do
は
more
鳴り
than
物
just
入りで
cry
大
out
き
for
な声で
peace.
平和を叫ぶことはで
It's
きませ
been
ん
about
けれど
30
も、
years since
あれ
that
から
time.
30何年、
There has not been a
な
single
んて言い
night
ます
that I
か、
haven't
一
thought
日も
about those
私は
horrible
思い出
days,
さないで寝た
nor
ことは
gone
な
to
い
sleep
し、
without saying,
ごめん
I'm
なさい
sorry.
ねって謝らないで寝たことはないです。だからそのことをたった26人し
So
か
though
1
my
年で
school
卒業し
only
ま
has
せんけども、
26 students
そう
in
いう
each
人にし
graduating
っかりと
class, I
伝
certainly
え
have
て
to
い
at
く、
least
い
keep
かなきゃい
telling
けないっ
people
て
like
いう。
them about this
だから
history.
私は
This is
適
why
当
I
に
have to live in a
生きてちゃ
meaningful
いけない。
way. And
もっ
also, I
と
have to
強
be
くな
tough.
ってね、戦争知
I
らない
feel
人には
strongly
どうして
that
も
I
分か
want
っても
people
ら
who
いた
don't
いっ
know
て
war
い
to
う
know these
思いが
stories.
強いので、
This is
生
the
きがいっ
challenge
て言い
of
ま
my
すか、
life. I need to
そうい
live
うも
so
のを
that
感じ
people can
ており
learn
ます
what
今。
happened.
All right, we're back. Well, here in the studio, we didn't hear any English, but hopefully the English went out over the air there.
Shall I just sort
You
of
might
tell a
just-
little bit
just
about
tell
it?
a little bit about it,
Sure.
just in case. Sure.
Sure. You know, when I see her, everyone at the school calls her Okuda Sensei, Teacher Okuda. And when I see that, I remember why it is that I've worked so many hours on this book, beside the general sense that someone needs to do it. She is a wonderful, warm, funny, strong person. And she talks in the clip about how she feels that this experience made her stronger. Now, this is someone who, before the bombing, survived tuberculosis and peritonitis, nearly died long before she was almost having her 30th birthday and walked into Hiroshima that day. But she talks about how she feels like it made her stronger, and that even though there has been 30 years that has passed, she hasn't had a night where she didn't think about those horrible days or say that she was sorry for all that she couldn't do in those days. And she also talked about how important it is to her to be able to tell the students at her school, where she teaches Kiristu-kyo Dokuritsu Gakuen, which is in English, Christian Independence High School. It's a school sort of founded on a Quaker sort of model. And how for her it's so important that people who don't have any real firsthand experience of war, and certainly not of nuclear war, to understand what this really means. And that she needs to be tough, and she needs to live a long life and make it meaningful by telling people about what happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, according to what you're saying, she must be almost 100 years old now. You say she was 30
93.
Yeah, she was 30 years old when she went into the day after it happened. That's incredible.
And you know, one of the things that's interesting that in her diary isn't mentioned, but her birthday is August 9th.
Wow.
So her birthday was 3 days into this 8-day search, the day of the bombing of Nagasaki. But I guess not much of a year for birthdays that year.
No, not at all.